Hey everyone, if you enjoy my park ranger horror stories, I've started uploading them on Spotify too. My YouTube channel got demonetized, so I'm putting a lot more focus into Spotify now. You'll find daily scary stories there with longer, darker, and more immersive horror content. If you want to support the channel, please go follow the Spotify page and leave a 5-star rating. It genuinely helps me keep making these stories. The Spotify link is in the description and pinned comment. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and I'll see you there. I have pulled 3 bodies out of this forest. 2 were hikers. One was a ranger, a kid 26 years old, who slipped on ice above the Hoh River and hit the rocks below. I was the one who carried him out. I was the one who called his mother. In 35 years of working Olympic National Park, I have seen things that would make most people quit on the first day. I have seen a black bear drag a 200-pound elk carcass uphill through mud like it weighed nothing. I have found a cougar kill so clean and so precise it looked like a surgeon had done the work. I have stood in the middle of the Hoh rainforest at 2 in the morning, alone with no flashlight, and felt perfectly fine about it. I do not scare easy. That is not me being tough. That is just 35 years of data. My name is Gerald Marsh. I was 61 years old when this happened. 3 years from retirement. I had already picked out the house. Small place near Sequim, west-facing porch. Good view of the mountains I was finally going to stop working in. I tell you all this so you understand the kind of man I was when I drove into the Hoh River Valley on the 4th of February. Skeptical, experienced, tired in the good way, the way that comes from knowing your job cold and doing it anyway. The call had come in at 6 that morning, routine. A weather event 2 days earlier had dropped nearly 4 feet of snow in the backcountry zone above the visitor center. A volunteer trail crew doing a sweep had reported an obstruction on the Hoh Lake Trail, something across the path about 3 miles in. They hadn't gone close. The snow was still heavy, temperature was sitting around 18 degrees, and they were volunteers, not idiots. My supervisor asked if I wanted a partner. I told him no. 3 miles in, something across the trail, probably a down cedar, maybe a debris slide. 2 hours of work, maybe 3, then back to the station for coffee and paperwork. I parked at the end of the plowed road, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The Hoh rainfall in February is not what most people imagine when they think of Washington State. There is no green. The big maples are bare, their branches wrapped in thick moss that hangs down like gray curtains. The spruce and fir are dark and heavy with snow. The sky was low that morning, the color of old concrete, and the only sound was my own boots breaking through the crust of the snow, and somewhere far away, the river. It took me 2 hours to reach the 3-mile mark. What I found there was not a down cedar. I smelled it before I saw it. Not rot, it was too cold for that, something else. Copper, sharp and heavy, the way the air smells after lightning hits close. My brain registered it and filed it before I even understood why. I came around a bend in the trail where the trees opened up into a small natural clearing, maybe 60 feet across. The snow in the clearing was smooth and white, except for the center, where the ground was dark. 6 Roosevelt elk, all dead. They were arranged in a rough semicircle, their bodies facing inward, like they had all turned toward the center of the clearing at the same moment. Big animals, the largest one I estimated at around 800 pounds. Cows, mostly, 1 young bull. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a while before I went in, not because I was scared, because something about the arrangement looked wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. And I have learned over 35 years that when something looks wrong, you take a minute before you walk into it. I put on my gloves and went in. No blood in the snow. That was the first thing. 6 elk all dead, and the snow around them was white and clean. No spray, no pool, no drag marks. In every predator kill I had ever seen, cougar, bear, wolf pack, blood is the first thing you see. It's everywhere. It soaks into the snow in great dark circles, and you can smell it from 20 yards out. There was none. The snow was clean. I crouched next to the nearest animal, a cow, maybe 450 pounds, and examined her. No visible wound, no bite marks on the neck, no claw marks on the flanks, no broken legs. Her eyes were open and her face was absolutely expressionless. Not the twisted look of an animal that fought or panicked. Just still, like something had switched her off. I checked all 6. Same thing, every one of them. No wounds I could find, no blood. I took photographs of everything. Working methodically, the way you do when you're writing a report in your head while your hands do the work. I measured the spacing between the bodies. I recorded the GPS coordinates. I wrote in my notebook, unknown mortality event, 6 Roosevelt elk, adult females and subadult male, arranged in semicircle, natural or intentional. No apparent cause of death, no blood, temperature 18 Fahrenheit. Snow depth 44 inches. Then I found the tracks. On the far side of the clearing, at the edge where the tree line started again, there were impressions in the snow. Not tracks, exactly. Impressions, because whatever made them had pushed down through nearly 2 feet of crust with each step. Wide, roughly oval. I put my boot next to one, and my boot looked small. I measured them. 14 inches wide, 22 inches long. Bear prints are wide, but they have a distinctive shape. 5 toes, claw marks forward. These had no claw marks. They were smooth and rounded at the front, almost like a very large, very wide human foot. The depth suggested something extremely heavy. I estimated 3, maybe 400 pounds of pressure per square foot based on the snow compaction. I measured the stride. The distance between prints was 9 feet 2 inches, bipedal. Whatever this was, it was walking on 2 legs. And whatever was between those legs was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 feet tall. And it was heavy enough to punch through snow that my snowshoes were barely denting. I stood there and looked at those tracks for a long time. Then I did what I always do. I wrote it down, took more photographs, and came up with a rational explanation. Bear drag, I decided. A bear had killed the elk somewhere else, drained them somehow, arranged them for cache storage. Bears in February are in and out of torpor, not true hibernation, and a big male black bear in a lean year will do strange things. The tracks were unusual, but wildlife tracks in unusual snow conditions do unusual things. I camped that night 50 yards from the clearing. I slept fine. That is the part I keep coming back to. I slept fine. The second day is when I started to understand that I was not alone. I don't mean I heard something or saw something. I mean I started noticing patterns, and patterns are what I do. 35 years of field work means you develop a kind of background awareness, like a radar that runs all the time without you thinking about it. And my radar, on day 2, was picking something up. It started with the food cache. I hang my food bag when I camp in the backcountry, standard practice, 10 feet off the ground between 2 trees, to keep bears and small animals out of it. That morning when I went to pull it down, I noticed the bag had been moved. Not taken, moved. It was hanging from the same rope between the same trees, but it was hanging differently. The knot I use is a specific half hitch I've tied 10,000 times, and I know what it looks like. The knot had been undone and reteed, clumsier than mine, but functional. I stood under that food bag for a long time. I untied it and went through everything inside. Nothing was taken, nothing was damaged. Every item was exactly as I had packed it, except they were in a slightly different order. Like someone had gone through them one by one, examined each thing, and put them back. I wrote in my notebook, food cache disturbed, nothing taken. Order of items altered, not consistent with bear or small mammal behavior. Then I found the camera. I had set up a small trail camera the previous evening, pointed at the elk clearing, motion activated. Standard procedure when investigating unusual mortality events. I wanted to see if anything came back to the carcasses overnight. The camera was still on its mount, still running, still powered. It was pointed at a tree trunk 3 feet away from it. Someone had turned it. Not knocked it, not moved the mount. Turned it deliberately, so that instead of pointing at the clearing, it was pointing at a completely useless angle at a spruce tree. The motion capture SD card had 47 photos on it. All 47 were of the bark of that tree. I sat down in the snow. A bear doesn't turn a camera. A cougar doesn't turn a camera. Whatever turned that camera knew what it was, knew what it did, and knew that turning it 90 degrees would make it stop doing that. I want you to understand what I was feeling at this point, because it wasn't fear. Not yet. It was something stranger than fear. It was the feeling I imagine a scientist gets when a result comes back from an experiment that shouldn't be possible. That blank, buzzing, slightly nauseating moment when your model of reality gets something wrong. I was being studied, not hunted, not threatened, studied. There is a difference, and whatever this was, it understood the difference. That night, the sound started. I was in my tent, maybe 9 o'clock, when I felt it more than heard it. A low, deep vibration, like the lowest note on a pipe organ played somewhere very far away. It had no direction. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the ground and the air and the trees all together. It sat in my chest, in my sternum, and it resonated there the way sound resonates in a hollow thing. I lay still and I listened to it, and I timed it on my watch. It came in slow pulses, roughly 8 seconds apart. It went on for 45 minutes and then it stopped. I wrote it down. I estimated the frequency, below 60 hertz, possibly below 20, which would put it in the infrasound range, below what human ears can normally detect. Some large animals produce infrasound. Elephants, tigers. I wrote that down too. I told myself there was an explanation. I almost believed it. On the third night, I saw it. I didn't plan to. I was asleep, or I thought I was. That half sleep you fall into in the cold when your body is tired, but some part of your brain stays switched on. I came awake all at once, sitting up in my sleeping bag, with no idea why. The tent was vibrating, not shaking, vibrating. A fine, high-frequency trembling in the nylon, in the poles, in the ground under the sleeping pad. The sound was back, but stronger, much stronger. I could feel it in my back teeth. I sat there for a minute, breathing slowly, the way I have trained myself to breathe when something is wrong and I need to think clearly. Then I unzipped the tent. It was a clear night. Rare for February in the Olympics, but there it was, a hard clear sky, black and full of stars, and a three-quarter moon that was laying down enough light to read by. The snow was brilliant. The trees were black against it. The clearing was empty. I stood outside my tent in my boots and my jacket, and I looked at the tree line all the way around. Nothing. The sound was fading now, tapering back down the way it always did, slow and even. I waited. Then it moved. At the far edge of the clearing, where the big Sitka spruce grew thick and close together, something came out of the trees. I want to be precise here because I am a precise man. I am not given to exaggeration, and I have no interest in making this sound more dramatic than it was. So I'll tell you exactly what I saw. It was large, very large. It moved upright on two legs, and its head cleared the lower branches of the spruce trees, which I know from memory to be around 9 feet off the ground. It was dark, not black exactly, but a dark gray-brown, and there was a texture to it like heavy fur or matted vegetation. I could not tell which at that distance. It moved through 3.5 feet of snow without any sound at all. I have watched bears move through deep snow. I have watched elk move through deep snow. Everything that moves through deep snow makes noise. The crunch, the compression, the labored breathing of something working against resistance. This made no sound, not a single sound. It moved the way a shadow moves, smooth and weightless, and the snow barely seemed to register it. It came to the center of the clearing and it stopped. It turned and it looked at me. I could not see its face clearly at that distance in that light. I could see the shape of a head, large, wide, slightly forward on the neck. I could see that it was oriented toward me. I could feel in some way I cannot explain and will not try to that it was aware of me in a very specific and deliberate way. Not as a threat, not as prey, as a subject. We stood like that, me outside my tent, it in the center of the clearing. For what my watch later told me was 4 minutes and 30 seconds. It felt much longer. Then it turned and walked back into the trees and was gone. I did not go back into the tent. I sat outside with my back against a spruce tree and my knees up, and I waited for the sun to come up. It took 5 hours. I did not write anything in my notebook that night. There are some things that don't fit in a notebook. On day 4, I packed up and I started to walk out. I was not running. I want to be clear about that. I packed methodically. I ate breakfast, I checked my gear. 35 years doesn't leave you even when your hands want to shake. I was calm. I was functional. I was also absolutely certain, in a way I had no logical basis for but could not argue with, that the thing had not gone far. The first sign came maybe a quarter mile down the trail. A Douglas fir, maybe 2 feet in diameter, lying across the path. Fresh, the broken end was pale and sharp, the wood still damp. The tree had not been there when I came in 3 days ago. I know this trail well. I've walked it 50 times. I went around it and kept going. 200 yards further, another one. Same thing. Fresh break, across the trail, angled in a way that pushed me left, off the main path, toward a side drainage I didn't recognize. I stopped and I looked at the 2 trees and I thought about it. A windstorm can drop trees across a trail. It happens. But windstorm-down trees fall in the direction of the wind. And these 2 were both angled the same way, in a direction that had nothing to do with the weather system that had come through Ford's days ago. I pulled out my compass. The angle of both trees was pushing me northeast, off the trail, toward higher ground. I tried to go around the second tree and stay on the main trail. 30 yards further on, a third tree. And the trail markers, the small orange reflective tabs nailed to post every 100 yards or so, were wrong. I have walked this trail enough to know approximately where they should be. They were moved. Not all of them, just enough. Just enough to confirm what the trees were already telling me. I was being redirected. I stood in the snow for a long time and I had a conversation with myself. The rational argument was simple. Go off trail in winter backcountry alone, you die. Stay on the marked path, get to the road, get in the truck, go home. That is the only sensible option. But the trail was compromised. The markers were wrong. And I had watched something the size of a truck move through deep snow in absolute silence, and then spend 2 minutes studying me from a clearing. And I had the feeling, not a thought, a feeling, that if it wanted me dead, I would already be dead. That if it was leading me somewhere, There was a reason it was leading me there. I turned northeast. I followed the trees. It took about 40 minutes of slow going through unbroken snow before I found it. A collapsed western red cedar, massive, the kind that takes 3 people to get their arms around. It had come down a long time ago, maybe decades, and the forest had grown up partially over it, so the root ball was buried in moss and fern and new growth. But the storm had shifted something, moved some of the debris, and there, underneath the far end of the root ball where it had pulled free of the ground, was an opening, not a gap, an entrance. It was roughly 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, and it went down at a slight angle into the earth, and the cold air coming out of it had a smell to it, old and deep and mineral, like the inside of a well. I got out my flashlight. I thought about not going in. I went in. The tunnel went down for about 20 feet and then opened up into a larger space. A natural chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with a low ceiling of packed earth and roots. My flashlight moved around the walls, bones, everywhere, sorted almost, not randomly scattered, but arranged in a way that suggested long habit, long occupation. Animal bones of every size, deer, elk, bear, smaller things I couldn't immediately identify. Old bones, ancient bones, bones that had turned the pale yellow of very old ivory. Dozens of species. Decades, maybe centuries, of accumulation. I moved the light slowly and I took it all in and I made myself stay calm and professional and empirical. Den site. Long-term habitation. Evidence of sustained predatory activity over extended period. I was making notes in my head even as my hand with the flashlight was shaking slightly. Then I found the human section. It was in the back of the chamber, set slightly apart from the rest. A group of bones, adult human, more than one individual. I could see that from the number of long bones, the skulls. 4, maybe 5 people, old. Decades old at minimum, possibly much longer. The bones had the same yellow patina as the animal remains around them. They had not been disturbed. They had not been hidden. They were exactly as placed as everything else in that chamber. I stood there in the dark with my flashlight, and I looked at those bones, and I understood what I was looking at. Not a graveyard, not a kill site, not a warning. A record. This thing, whatever it was, had been here so long that the bones of the people it had taken were old and yellow and still. It had been here before the trails, before the park, before the rangers and the visitor center, and the interpretive signs about the old-growth forest. It had been here when those people, those 4 or 5 people whose bones sat so quietly in the back of that chamber, had walked into this forest and never walked out. And it had led me here not to threaten me, not to add me to the collection, but to show me. To make sure that at least one person who could write things down understood something very simple and very important. This was here first. This has always been here. And it will be here after every road and trail and ranger station and retirement home in Sequim has gone back to moss and rain. I stood in that cave for a very long time before I turned around and walked out. I reached the ranger station at 4:47 in the afternoon. The woman at the front desk took one look at me and asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine. She looked like she didn't believe me, but she didn't push it. People around here learn not to push things with old rangers. We get a certain look sometimes, and the kindest thing is to let it pass. I sat down at my desk. I got a cup of coffee. I stared at the wall for a while. Then I wrote the report. I described the elk. 6 animals, unusual arrangement, no visible cause of death, no blood, no predator sign. I described the tracks. Measurements, stride length, depth, all precise and accurate. I described the cave, location, dimensions, contents, species represented, estimated age of remains. I included the human bones. That part had to go in. Leaving it out would have been derelict and potentially criminal. And whatever else was changing in me that afternoon, I was not going to become a man who covered up the existence of human remains. What I left out was everything that didn't have a measurement attached to it. The food cache, rearranged but not stolen. The camera, turned to face a tree. The sound in the night that lived in my chest. The way the trees had been moved to redirect me. The thing in the moonlight, standing in the center of the clearing, looking at me with a patience so enormous and so old that it made my whole life feel like a footnote. None of that went in the report. Not because I was afraid of what people would think. I have been a ranger long enough that I don't particularly care what people think. Not because I didn't believe it happened. Every word of it happened. I left it out because putting it in the report would start a process I had no interest in starting. People would come. Scientists, reporters, agencies with acronyms. They would put up cameras and dig into that chamber and run DNA tests and write and hold press conferences. And in the middle of all of that, with all the noise and the lights and the disturbance, I thought about those tracks. 9-foot stride. Weight that punched through 2 feet of snow crust like it was paper. I thought about how it had studied me for 3 days without me knowing. I thought about how smart you'd have to be to do that. To watch something that carefully, for that long, without ever being seen until you chose to be seen. I thought about what something that smart, something that patient, something that old, would do if a fleet of government vehicles and news trucks rolled into its valley and started digging up its home. I closed my notebook. My supervisor came by around 5:30. Young guy, good ranger, asks the right questions. How'd it go out there? He said. Fine, I said. Wrote it all up. Cave's going to be a process. Medical examiner, probably state police. Probably, I said. He leaned against the doorframe. So you were out there 4 days. Anything else come up? Any wildlife encounters? Looked at him. I thought about the clearing, the moonlight, the shape at the tree line, 9 feet tall, moving through deep snow without a sound, turning to look at me with a patience I will never forget. I thought about the message in that cave, written in bone over what might have been centuries. I thought about my porch in Sequim and the mountains I was going to watch from it, and the long, quiet years I had left to live, if I chose my words very carefully right now. I said no. He nodded and walked away. I put in for early retirement before I left the building that afternoon. Typed it up, printed it, signed it, walked it to HR myself. 3 years early. Full pension, no problems. The woman in HR looked surprised. You sure, Gerald? 3 more years your payout goes up by. I'm sure, I said. I drove home along the river road. The mountains were on my left, dark against the last light, the kind of massive and permanent you stop seeing after 35 years. I saw it that night. I sat in my truck in my driveway for a long time, looking at the tree line behind my house. And I thought about the Hoh Rain Forest in the dark, the snow deep and clean and quiet under the trees, the cave in the earth beneath the fallen cedar. I thought about those bones, yellow and old and undisturbed. I thought about how it had not hurt me, how it had, in its own way, chosen to be honest with me, shown me the truth of itself and let me walk away. I owed it the same. So here is what I know and what I will carry with me to that porch in Sequim and no further. Something lives in the Olympic backcountry. It has lived there longer than any record we have. It is intelligent, more intelligent than we have language for, because the language we have for animal intelligence is built on the assumption that nothing out there is as smart as we are. It is not aggressive, but it is absolute. It has a territory, and the territory has rules, and the rules are older than the park, older than the trails, older than the name we gave to those mountains. And it knows us. It has always known us. It watches us walk into its forest with our GPS units and our trail cameras and our laminated maps, and it watches us walk out again, most of us, anyway, and it does not interfere, most of the time. The next ranger they send up the Hoh Lake Trail will find the elk carcasses are gone. There will be nothing there but snow. The camera I left behind will be found either destroyed or missing. The cave, if whoever I sent the report to ever gets up there to look, and if it allows that, the cave will be empty, clean, like nothing was ever there. That is what I believe. I could be wrong. I have been wrong before. I am an empirical man, and the evidence I have is incomplete and subjective and not reproducible under controlled conditions. But I am also, for the first time in 35 years, glad that I chose not to look at everything too closely. Some things are not findings. Some things are warnings. And some things were here before us and will be here after us, and the only reasonable response to that, the only honest, sensible, self-preserving response, is to write your report, hand it in, drive home along the river road, and let the mountains keep their secrets. I start my retirement in 60 days. I have already decided I will not take walks in the woods. The last thing the floatplane pilot said to me before he took off was, "Don't let the quiet get to you." I laughed. I told him I was a scientist. I said I loved quiet. He didn't laugh back. I should have paid more attention to that. My name is Yemi Adisa. I'm a wildlife biologist. At the time, I was 34 years old, healthy, rational, and completely sure of what was real and what wasn't. I had a master's degree and half a PhD. I had spent 8 years tracking animals in remote places. I had camped alone in the Yukon. I had spent 3 weeks in a blind in Botswana with nothing but a notebook and a satellite phone. I was not easily scared. I was not the kind of person who heard things in the dark. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this. Post 7 was a small wooden station on a small island in a lake in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. The island was maybe 300 meters across at its widest point. There were 6 spruce trees, a frozen shore, a supply shed, and a one-room monitoring station with a cot, a wood stove, a radio, and a wall of telemetry equipment. No road, no bridge, no neighbors. The nearest human being was 40 minutes away by floatplane, and that was only if the weather was good. My job was simple. The local wolf pack, Pack 7, 7 animals, wore GPS radio collars. The collars sent out a signal on a specific frequency. My receiver picked up those signals. I logged the positions every 4 hours, built movement maps, watched Pack's territory shift through the winter. Once a week, I radioed my data to the main station in Ely. That was it. That was the whole job. I arrived on a Tuesday in late January. The ice on the lake was 2 feet thick and gray-blue in the afternoon light. The tree line on the far shore was dark and still. When the floatplane engine faded and disappeared, the silence that replaced it was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. I told myself I loved that kind of quiet. I set up my equipment. I ate a can of soup. I pulled on my headphones, tuned into the Pack 7 frequencies, and listened to 7 healthy wolves move through the forest 3 kilometers to the northwest. Their signals were clean and strong. Everything was normal. I slept fine that first night. I want you to understand that too. It was the second night when I first heard it. I was doing my midnight log check, routine, boring, half asleep. I was cycling through the Pack 7 frequencies one by one, just making sure everyone was still moving and alive, when I heard something between channels, a signal, faint but steady. It didn't match any of my assigned frequencies. It was sitting about 12 kilohertz above the Pack 7 range, in a band I had no reason to be listening to. It was a clean pulse, not static, not random noise, a real, deliberate signal. I wrote in my log, unidentified FREC, 151.44 megahertz. Possible atmospheric interference or equipment crosstalk. Monitoring. That's what scientists do. We don't jump to conclusions, we observe and we wait. The signal disappeared 20 minutes later. I finished my log, turned off the overhead light, and lay down on the cot. The thing about silence, real silence, wilderness silence, is that it isn't actually silent. There's wind. There's wood settling. There's the low, random crack of ice on the lake, which sounds exactly like someone stepping carefully. I lay there and listened to the ice for a while. Then I told myself to stop being dramatic, and I went to sleep. 3 days passed, nothing unusual. Pack 7 moved northwest, then looped south. Normal winter ranging behavior. I filed my first weekly radio report. The main station in Ely said, "Good job, stay warm, over and out." On the 4th night, it came back, not one signal this time. 4. All sitting just above my assigned range. All pulsing clean and steady. And the moment I found the first one and locked on, I heard the others fall into place around it. One by one, like they'd been waiting. I sat up very straight in my chair. I picked up my pencil and I wrote down all 4 frequencies. Then I went to find out who they belonged to. Every radio collar ever used in the BCA Wolf monitoring program is logged in a master archive. Frequency, caller ID, wolf designation, pack assignment, deployment date, and if applicable, date of death or caller recovery. I had a copy of the full archive on my laptop. It took me about 20 minutes to cross-reference all 4 frequencies. I wish it had taken longer. The 4 frequencies belonged to 4 wolves from Pack 12, a pack that had ranged about 60 kilometers east of my position, on the far side of the lake system. Their names in the database were simple designations: 12 Alpha F, 12 Beta M, 12 Gamma F, 12 Delta M. A breeding female, 2 males, another female. 12 Alpha F had died in March of 2016. Suspected starvation. 12 Beta M had died in January 2017. Cause unknown. Collar recovered. 12 Gamma Emma F had died in September of 2018. Vehicle collision on a logging road. 12 Delta M was the last. Confirmed dead in February of 2019. Almost exactly 6 years before I was sitting in that chair. Cause listed as natural. A researcher had found the body, photographed it. The collar had been removed and returned to storage. All 4 collars were listed as decommissioned. 2 were in a storage locker in Ely. 1 had been destroyed in a lab fire. The last one's location was listed as unknown. It had been misplaced during a facility move. So I went through the rational explanations one by one, the way you're supposed to. Maybe someone reactivated old collars and put them on new animals. But there was no record of that. And even if there was, the frequencies were transmitting right now, in winter, without any active monitoring project in that sector. Maybe the signals were bleeding in from another research station. I checked. There was no active monitoring station within 200 kilometers broadcasting on those frequencies. Maybe my receiver was malfunctioning. I ran full diagnostics. Everything was clean. Maybe the archive was wrong. I checked the death records twice. There were photographs, necropsy reports. Signed field notes. These wolves were dead. They had been dead for years. I sat back in my chair. I looked at my receiver. All 4 signals were still there, pulsing like heartbeats, steady and patient. And then I noticed something that turned my mouth completely dry. They were moving, not randomly, not in a scattered, disorganized way. They were moving together, same speed, same direction, in a tight, coordinated cluster. Pack formation. They were moving toward the island. I told myself there was an explanation. I just hadn't found it yet. I kept telling myself that for the next 3 days while I watched the dead frequencies get closer, and I watched something else happen that I couldn't explain away no matter how hard I tried. The living wolves ran. Pack 7, my wolves, the healthy ones, the ones with fresh batteries in their collars and warm blood in their bodies, started moving south on the 2nd day after the dead signals appeared. Fast. Directional. Not hunting, not ranging. Running. I have been studying wolves for 8 years. Wolves do not abandon their winter territory. Their range is everything to them in winter. It's where they know the deer trails, the frozen lake crossings, the best places to wait. Leaving in January is not something they do. It costs them too much energy. It puts them into unfamiliar ground with unfamiliar prey. But Pack 7 ran south and did not stop. By day 3, their signals had faded to the edge of my receiver's range. By day 4, they were gone. Only the dead frequencies remained. I started sleeping with the light on. I told myself it was just easier to read that way. On the 5th night, I heard it for the first time, a knock, coming from the ice, not from above it, from underneath it. One solid knock, like something had bumped against the ice from below. Then silence, then another knock, from a slightly different position, then another. I stood at the window and looked out at the lake. The ice was pale and flat in the moonlight. Nothing on it, nothing I could see. The knocking stopped after about 10 minutes. I didn't write it in my log. That was the first thing I didn't write down. Looking back now, that matters. Scientists write everything down. The moment I started leaving things out of the log, something had already changed in me. I just didn't know it yet. I started plotting the dead frequencies on my map every hour. What I found took my breath away, and not in a good way. They were circling the island. Every single night, all 4 signals moved in a slow, wide orbit around my position. Always the same distance from the shore. About 400 meters out, right at the edge of the thicker ice. Always perfectly spaced from each other, 90 degrees apart, like 4 points on a compass. Always the same speed. It was not random movement. It was not the signal drift you get from a bouncing transmission. This was deliberate, coordinated, like a patrol. I pulled up every piece of literature I knew about wolfpack behavior. Wolves do patrol the borders of their territory. They do move in formation. They do maintain spacing when they're covering ground together. But not in perfect circles, not around a fixed point, not for hours every single night without variation. I checked my logging software for errors. I ran a signal simulation to see if reflections off the ice could create a false orbit pattern. The simulation said no. One night, I think it was the 7th night, I put on my boots and my coat and I walked outside. I stood at the edge of the shore, right at the place where the land ice met the lake ice. I held my small flashlight and I pointed it out at the darkness. And the knocking stopped, not slowly, not gradually, all at once, as if whatever was out there had heard me come outside and gone completely still. My receiver, which I'd left on inside, was picking up all 4 frequencies. I could see the little lights through the window, but nothing was moving out there. The ice was flat and silent, and the darkness between me and the far shore was just darkness. I stood there for a long time. I went back inside. I didn't sleep at all that night. The blizzard came on the 9th day. The pilot radioed me 12 hours before it hit. He said it was a big one. He said he'd be grounded for at least a week, maybe longer. He said I had enough food and wood and I'd be fine. And he said it almost like he was trying to convince himself. I said I'd be fine too. The storm hit that evening and didn't stop. The world outside my windows disappeared behind a white wall of noise. The temperature dropped to -30. Ice formed on the inside of the window glass. I kept the stove burning and I sat at my receiver, and I logged the dead frequencies, which were still circling, every single night, even through the blizzard, like weather meant nothing to them. Days 1 through 7 of the blizzard, signals present, circling, patient. I stopped sleeping for more than an hour at a time. I kept the light on always. I ate without tasting anything. I started doing something at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, that I told myself was just equipment testing. I was transmitting on the dead frequencies, just short pulses at first, then longer ones. I told myself I was checking for feedback interference. I told myself it was diagnostic. I knew even then that it wasn't. Day 8 of the blizzard, I woke up at 4 a.m. and checked my receiver, and the signals were gone. All 4 of them, gone. I cycled through the frequencies 3 times. Nothing. I checked my equipment. Everything working fine. They were simply gone. After 3 weeks of constant, patient circling presence, silence. I sat in that silence for a long time. And somehow, this is the part that still scares me more than anything else. Somehow the silence was worse than the signals had been. Because at least when they were there, I knew where they were. Now I didn't know where they were. I pulled my coat on and I sat by the door, and I listened to the blizzard and I waited for morning. Day 9. I found it near the eastern edge of the island, half hidden by a fallen spruce. A wolf. It was alive. I could see its sides moving, slow, shallow breaths. It was the thinnest animal I had ever seen in the wild. Its ribs showed through its coat. Its legs were tucked beneath it awkwardly, like it had simply stopped moving and folded to the ground. Its eyes were open but clouded. Not blind, exactly. Just wrong. Distant. Like something looking at a place you can't see. What it was doing was the hardest part to describe. It was turning in a slow, small circle, over and over, without stopping. Not agitated, not in pain, just circling, the way a dog turns before it lies down, but never lying down. Around and around, in a spiral that was getting slowly tighter, like a clock winding down. I checked its collar. I already knew what I would find. I think I knew the moment I saw it. The frequency was 151.4440 megahertz, the first dead signal. The one I had heard alone on that second night, before the others joined it. 12 Alpha F, the breeding female, dead since March of 2016. I'm a scientist. I know what that should mean. I know there is a rational world in which a wolf can be alive and wearing a collar that matches a dead animal's archived frequency. Collar reuse. Data error, a dozen explanations. I knelt in the snow next to that wolf, and I couldn't think of a single one. I put my hand near its face, slowly, the way you approach any wild animal. It didn't react. Its clouded eyes kept looking at the place I couldn't see. Its legs kept moving in that slow, endless, tightening circle. I stayed there for a long time. Day 10, 3 more. Same condition. Same spiraling movement, same clouded, distant eyes. Their collars broadcasting the remaining 3 dead frequencies, clean and strong. They didn't acknowledge me. They didn't acknowledge each other, even when they circled close enough to touch. I stopped filing radio reports. I realized this only later, that at some point I had simply stopped walking to the radio and sitting down. It didn't seem important anymore. Nothing inside the station seemed important anymore. I started going outside and sitting at the tree line, facing the forest. I don't know exactly what I was listening for. I'm not sure I was listening for anything. It felt more like waiting. Like something very large was nearly finished with whatever it was doing, and I just needed to be still and let it finish. The 4 wolves circled behind me in the snow. The wind was low. The blizzard had broken. The stars above the tree line were so bright it almost hurt. I sat very still and I faced the trees. And somewhere between the silence and the cold, something I cannot describe and will not try to describe. Something in the darkness between the trees looked back. It did not frighten me. That is what frightens me now. The float plane arrived on day 11, mid-morning. I heard it before I saw it. The engine cutting through the cold, clear air, dropping down from the northwest. I was outside when it landed. I had been outside for a while. I was sitting in the snow near the tree line, facing the forest, very still. I was not cold. The pilot came across the ice and stopped a few feet away from me and said my name. I turned and looked at him. I was fine. I knew I was fine. I could feel everything clearly. The cold, the light, the sound of the plane engine still ticking as it cooled. I was not confused. I was not distressed. He asked me why I hadn't filed a radio report in 6 days. I told him I couldn't find the right frequency. He asked me how long I'd been sitting outside. I told him I wasn't sure. He looked at the tree line and then back at me, and then he asked me if I was ready to go. I stood up. I brushed the snow off my coat. I asked him if there were any other ranger stations on this lake. He said no. Post 7 was the only one. I nodded. I said I know. I just wanted to confirm it was them I'd been talking to. He didn't ask me who I meant. I don't think he wanted to know. He took me home. I left the BWCA the following week. I told my supervisors it was a personal matter. I went back to Chicago, and I sat in my apartment for about 2 months. And then I got a job teaching introductory biology at a community college. And I never went back to field research. I am fine. I want to be clear about that. I sleep, I eat, I laugh. I have a life that looks completely normal from the outside, and mostly it is. I just don't go into forests anymore. I don't own a radio. And sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, when I wake up and the apartment is quiet, I find myself sitting at my kitchen table facing the window. Very still, very calm, with no memory of having gotten up. I don't know how long I've been sitting there. I never know. There's one more thing. 3 years after I left the BWCA, a graduate researcher at the University of Minnesota was archiving old field data, going through years of radio telemetry records from monitoring stations across the region. She came across my data logs from Post 7. The movement records were there, the PAC 7 logs, all the normal stuff. But she also found something else buried in the file, a separate transmission log, time-stamped. Every night, starting on day 4 of my assignment and running all the way through the blizzard. Even through the days, I stopped filing reports. Up until the morning the float plane arrived. Regular transmissions, short ones, on the unknown frequencies, the dead ones. She counted them. There were over 40 transmissions in total, weeks of them. Night after night, 2 or 3 in the morning. Same time I used to wake up in the apartment and find myself at the table. Each transmission contained only one word. The word was the same every single time. Staying, staying, staying. She flagged the file as a data anomaly and moved on. She had a thesis to finish. She didn't dig into it further. I think about her sometimes. I hope she stays curious. I hope she doesn't dig into it further. Some frequencies are better left unanswered. I learned that too late. I want you to picture something. A wooden post, standing alone in the middle of a forest. No trail nearby, no reason for it to be there. Just a post, old and rotting at the base, with the U.S. Forest Service stamp faded almost to nothing near the top. And carved into the wood, deep deliberate cuts, 41 tally marks. Not scratched, not scrawled, carved. Like someone had all the time in the world. I found that post on a Tuesday morning in October. And I wish, with everything I have, that I had just kept walking. My name is Dana Cole. I am 38 years old. I have a divorce behind me, a studio apartment I barely unpacked, and a transfer request that came through faster than I expected. Probably because nobody else wanted the posting. Pisgah National Forest, Backcountry Division, Western North Carolina. Before Pisgah, I spent 6 years behind a desk at the USFS regional office in Asheville. Permits, budgets, compliance reports. I was good at the work in the way that you can be good at something you don't care about at all. After my marriage ended, I needed to move. Not just apartments. I needed to move my whole life somewhere it didn't recognize me. The backcountry posting felt like that. Fresh start, clean air, real work. My supervisor was a man named Gary Pritch. He had been stationed at the Pisgah district for 19 years, and he had the energy of someone who had already decided nothing unusual would ever happen on his watch. He showed me the supply locker, the patrol routes, the radio check schedule. He told me the terrain was rough but manageable. He told me the hikers were mostly fine but sometimes stupid. He told me bear activity had been low that season. He did not tell me about the basin. Nobody did. My first 2 weeks were ordinary. Trail maintenance, waypoint checks, clearing storm debris from the Davidson River corridor. The forest in late autumn is a particular kind of beautiful that I was not prepared for. The leaves were already down, most of them, so you could see far between the trees. Long gray sight lines, the kind of visibility that should make you feel safe. It didn't. There was something about Pisgah's backcountry that sat wrong with me from the start. Not the forest itself, the silence of it. Not a peaceful silence, a held silence. Like the woods were waiting to exhale. I told myself I was just adjusting, that the divorce had left me with nerves I needed to walk off. I kept walking. On day 16, I was clearing a section of unmarked trail about 7 miles from the nearest access road, deep in. The kind of deep where your radio signal gets thin and your footsteps sound too loud. That's where I found the post. It was standing just off the trail, half hidden by a thicket of mountain laurel. Old growth. The wood was dark from decades of weather. The USFS stamp near the top was the kind they stopped using in the mid-80s, so this post had been here for at least 40 years. I almost walked past it, but something caught my eye. The marks on the south-facing side of the wood. I pushed through the laurel and looked closer. Tally marks. The kind you make when you're counting something. Groups of 4 vertical lines with a diagonal slash through them. 8 groups of 5. And then 1 extra mark, standing alone. 41. I took a photo. I told myself it was probably old. Trail workers sometimes marked distances or survey points on posts. There were reasonable explanations. But standing there in that quiet gray forest, with the wind dead still and not a single bird calling, I did not feel reasonable about it at all. Back at the station that evening, I pulled up the USFS regional database and cross-referenced missing persons reports filed for Pisgah National Forest and the surrounding counties. It took me about an hour, and then I sat back in my chair and I didn't move for a long time. Going back to 1979, the oldest records in the digital system, there were 41 unresolved missing persons cases. Hikers, mostly. A few hunters. One trail runner. 2 children who had wandered from a campsite in 1991 and were never found, all within a loose 12-mile radius of my patrol zone. 41 cases. 41 marks. Now look, I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. Coincidence. Old post, random carvings, and a regional area that happens to have a number of disappearances spread over 40-plus years. Missing persons in forest aren't rare. People get lost. People fall. People sometimes don't want to be found. But the marks weren't random. They were in groups, counted, and the post was standing in the middle of nowhere with no trail purpose, no survey function, no reason to exist except as a marker for something. I brought it to Gary the next morning. He looked at my printed spreadsheet. He looked at the photo of the post. He clicked his tongue the way he did when he was about to say something dismissive. Dana. He slid the paper back across the desk. We've got 40 years of case files here. Different counties, different agencies, different search teams. You're connecting dots that aren't connected. People disappear in mountains. That's not a mystery. That's geography. 41 cases, Gary. 41 marks. And if there were 38 marks, would you be sitting here? He gave me a look that wasn't unkind, exactly, but wasn't respectful either. You've been here 3 weeks. Let's get through the season first. I left his office and I stood outside in the cold air, and I thought about quitting. Instead, I made a phone call. Earl Bowen had retired from the Pisgah district 11 years ago after a 30-year career. His name came up 3 times in the older case files as the responding ranger on missing persons calls. I found a number for him through the USFS retiree directory. He lived about 40 minutes south in a town called Brevard. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him who I was. I told him I was looking into some old cases. He was polite, a little guarded, but he agreed to meet me. We sat at a table in a diner on Main Street. He was in his late 60s, thick-shouldered, with the careful, measured way of speaking that long-career field rangers tend to develop. I showed him the photo of the post on my phone. He went completely still. Not the kind of still where someone is thinking. The kind of still where someone has just seen something they already knew existed and had been hoping never to see again. The color left his face. I watched it happen. Earl. He set my phone face down on the table. Slowly, like it was something dangerous. I can't help you with this, he said. His voice was flat, controlled in the way that people get when they are working very hard to stay that way. You've seen it before. He didn't answer. Earl, there are 41 names in those case files. 41. If you know something, I know enough to tell you to leave it alone. He stood up. He put a $20 bill on the table for 2 coffees that neither of us had touched. He looked at me for a moment, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't irritation or dismissal. It was something I recognized later as a very specific kind of fear. The kind that has had years to harden into something permanent. Transfer back to Asheville, he said. Request it today. Tell them family reasons. They'll approve it. He walked out. He didn't look back. I sat at that table for a long time. Then I drove back to Pisgah and I started mapping. I bought a large format topographic map of the district and pinned it to the wall of my bunk room. Over the next 4 nights, I plotted every one of the 41 disappearances by their last known location, the final trail marker, the last GPS ping, the campsite where the gear was found but the person wasn't. On the first night, it looked like scatter, random points across a wide section of terrain. On the second night, I started seeing something, a density. The cases weren't spread evenly. They concentrated toward the western edge of my zone, toward the older, less traveled sections of the backcountry. On the 3rd night, I drew lines between the clusters, oldest cases to newest, and what I saw made my stomach drop. It wasn't random scatter. It was a spiral. A slow, loose spiral, tightening over decades, pulling inward toward a single point near the center of the western backcountry. A low-lying area surrounded by ridgeline on 3 sides, sheltered, invisible from any maintained trail. There was no official place name for it in the USFS database. No trail designation, no survey marker, no campsite record. But in a handwritten note attached to a 1987 case file, a note written by Earl Bowen himself, there were 3 words written in the margin, near Grinner's Basin. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I searched every map I could access, USG's topographic, USFS district, county surveyor records, even old Forestry Commission documents from the 1940s. Grinner's Basin did not appear on a single one. A place with a name but no map. That alone should have stopped me. It didn't. On a Friday morning, I told Gary I was doing a solo waypoint check on the western corridor. I packed 3 days of supplies, My service radio, a sidearm I was qualified to carry, but had never drawn in the field, and I went in. The hike to the area took most of the morning. The terrain got rougher past mile 5. The trails thinned out and then stopped existing. I was moving through old growth, trees so large around that 2 people couldn't link hands around them. The forest floor was thick with wet leaves. No sound except my own footsteps, and somewhere far off, water moving over rock. The light changed when I got close. I don't know how else to say it. The canopy was dense enough that the afternoon light came down in narrow gray shafts, and there was a stillness that pressed against you like a hand. I smelled it before I saw it. Not rot exactly. Something more complex. Wood smoke, old and cold, tanned hide, damp earth turned over and turned over again. And then I came through a stand of hemlocks and I stopped walking. The structure was maybe 60 feet in front of me. I have tried to describe this structure to people since, and I always fail to make them understand what made it so wrong. Because from a distance, you might almost call it clever, resourceful, even. But up close it was something else entirely. It was built low to the ground, half dug into the slope of the basin. The walls were made from salvaged trail signage. Those brown wooden boards with yellow lettering that mark distances and directions throughout the forest. They'd been stripped from their posts and layered like siding, the words still visible on some of them. Davidson River 3.2 mi, Bear Pen Gap, no camping beyond this point. The roof was a patchwork of gear, tarps, tent fabric, layered and weighted down with stones. And the frame was built from timber that hadn't been cut so much as broken. Thick branches snapped and lashed together with what appeared to be cord. And the leather. Stretched across sections of the outer wall, cured and dried to a dull brown, were panels of what I first thought was animal hide. Deer, maybe. Bear. I told myself that. I kept telling myself that. The entrance had no door, just a low opening covered by a hanging piece of canvas. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. I went in. Inside, the smell was overwhelming. Old smoke, animal fat, and something underneath it all that I cannot name and do not want to. The space was maybe 12 feet wide. There was a fire pit at the center, cold ash, built so the smoke would channel through a gap in the roof. Around the walls, shelving made from salvaged timber, holding containers, tin cans, glass jars, waxed cloth bundles, a sleeping area. More than one, I realized. At least 3 distinct areas of worn-down bedding. And on the central shelf, sitting between 2 flat stones like it was on a podium, a logbook. It was thick, maybe 200 pages, bound in dark leather that I was careful not to think about too hard. The cover had no title. Just a symbol pressed into the leather, a single tally mark. I opened it. The handwriting inside was cramped and precise, almost beautiful in its consistency. The earliest entries were in ink that had faded to a pale rust color. The later entries were darker, written by a different hand, and the most recent entries near the back were in a third hand, smaller letters, younger somehow. A father, a son, a grandson. Each entry was a record, a name, a date, a brief description written with the detachment of a naturalist describing a specimen. October 14, 1981. Male, late 20s, strong but slow on the downslope. Did not call out. Found the lower trail at dusk. Followed him from the ridge for 2 days. He made it easy. July 3, 1993. Female, 40s, solo hiker, good gear. She was careful. The boy watched and learned well. He is ready. March 2006. 2 of them, a couple. This was a lesson in patience. The man came looking for the woman after. They are together now. I turned the pages with hands that had gone completely numb. Not from cold. The entries were written with pride. Real pride. The kind a person feels when they are describing something they are good at. There was no guilt in a single line. No hesitation. Just the clean, careful record of a person, of 3 people, who had been doing this for so long it had become simply what they did. The logbook accounted for 41. I closed it. I stood up. I turned toward the entrance, and I heard, from somewhere very close outside, the slow and deliberate sound of a footstep pressing into wet leaves. I did not breathe. Another step, then silence. He or they had stopped just outside the entrance. I put my hand on my sidearm. I did not draw it. I stood absolutely still, the logbook in my left hand, listening to the most terrifying silence I have ever heard in my life. And then the canvas at the entrance shifted, just slightly, like something was brushing against it from the outside. And then it stopped. I waited 4 minutes. I counted every second. Then I moved. I came out of that structure at a low run and turned east, toward higher ground. I don't know if I made the right choice in that first second. I just moved. The forest around the basin was dim. It was mid-afternoon, but the canopy and the ridgeline blocked most of the light. Within 50 feet of the structure, the trees closed in and I could see maybe 30 feet in any direction. Not enough. Nowhere near enough. I keyed my radio, tried Gary's frequency, static. I tried the district emergency channel, more static, thinner. I was too deep and too low, the ridgeline swallowing my signal. I kept moving. For the first 20 minutes, I heard nothing behind me. No footsteps, no movement, no sound at all except my own breathing and the soft crack of branches underfoot. And that, the nothing, was somehow worse than if I had heard someone running. Because I knew, from the logbook, from those entries, from followed him from the ridge for 2 days, that silence was not safety. Silence was just the method. I stopped behind a large boulder and made myself think. Panic was pushing at the edges of my brain and I pushed back. Okay, what did I know? I knew the terrain sloped upward to the north and east. I knew the maintained trails were roughly 5 miles east. I knew my radio didn't work down here. I knew it was maybe 3 hours to full dark. I knew whoever was in that forest with me had been born in it, had grown up in it, knew every hollow, every deadfall, every ridge and creek and game path, every dead end. I could not outrun that. Not in the dark, not in unfamiliar terrain. I started moving again, more carefully now. Staying off the obvious low ground, moving along the slope where I could. The light was going faster than I expected. The cloud cover thickening, the gray of the sky deepening toward the gray of dusk. Then I heard it. Not footsteps, something else. A sound I can only describe as deliberate, a single branch, broken cleanly, not by wind, not by an animal, by something that wanted me to hear it, to my left, maybe 40 feet. I stopped. Another sound, ahead of me and to the right this time, closer. My mind went cold and clear in the way it does when your body decides that panic is a luxury it cannot afford. 2 directions, 2 sounds. One of them was hurting me, pushing me back down toward the basin, back down toward low ground, back toward a terrain that favored them completely. I turned south. The ground there was steep and choked with undergrowth. Laurel thickets so dense they were nearly walls. Bad ground, slow ground. Not the direction anyone running would choose. That was exactly why I chose it. I went into the laurel on my hands and knees in some places, the branches raking at my face and hands, my pack catching and tearing loose. I moved as quietly as I could, which wasn't quite at all, but I kept moving. Behind me, maybe 2 minutes after I entered the thicket, I heard the sound of someone moving through it too. Fast. Not careful anymore. Fast and direct, like a door had been kicked open, like something had been decided. I came out the other side of the thicket onto a steep slope of bare rock, loose shale sliding under my boots, and above me, maybe 300 feet of hard scramble, was the ridgeline, open sky. Gray and cold, and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I climbed. My hands were bleeding before I was halfway up. The shale was wet from recent rain, and twice I slid back several feet, grabbing at anything solid. My radio was banging against my hip. My lungs were screaming. I did not stop. Below me at the base of the rock slope, I heard the laurel thicket moving. Something coming through it fast, then slowing, then stopping. I looked down once. I shouldn't have. There was a figure at the edge of the thicket, standing very still at the bottom of the rock slope, looking up at me. Male. Tall. Dressed in layers of dark clothing that looked almost like they'd grown from the forest itself. His face was in shadow. He did not start climbing. He stood there and he watched me. And that stillness, that choice not to follow, it was a message. I understood it immediately and completely. I know what's up there. I know what open ground means. I know what you're doing. But I'll be here when you come back down. I kept climbing. I hit the ridgeline at a full scramble, came over the top edge on my stomach, and rolled onto flat rock. The sky above me was wide and dark gray, and the wind hit me like a wall. I was above the tree line. The forest fell away on both sides of the ridge. There was nothing above me but sky. I got my radio out. My hands were shaking badly. I keyed the emergency channel and started talking. I gave my name, my badge number, my GPS coordinates from my handheld unit. I said the words "officer in distress," and I gave the coordinates again. The static broke. Gary's voice came through, confused and then alarmed. I talked until I heard the words were coming. Stay on the ridge, do not come down. I sat on that rock in the cold wind, and I watched the tree line below me on both sides of the ridge. The forest was dark now, full dark. The trees below me, black shapes against a slightly less black sky. Nothing moved, nothing that I could see. Search and rescue reached the ridge 40 minutes later. I heard their voices before I saw their lights. When they came over the ridge line and I saw their faces, I did something I had not done once during the entire night. I cried. Just briefly, just enough. Then I told them everything, and we did not go back down until morning. The search of Grinner's Basin took 11 days. 3 bodies were recovered, all skeletal, all buried within a 200-foot radius of the compound. Forensic anthropologists estimated the oldest remains dated to the late 1970s. The most recent were significantly fresher, within the last 2 to 3 years. The compound itself was documented by a USFS evidence team, and then, after several weeks of legal and jurisdictional argument, dismantled. The logbook was taken to the FBI field office in Charlotte. A forensic linguist confirmed 3 distinct authors across a span of roughly 50 years. The leather panels on the outer walls were not animal hide. I won't say more than that. A man was identified from DNA evidence cross-referenced against a partial record that had been sitting unmatched in the CODIS database for 9 years. He was connected to the 3rd generation of entries. The son, middle generation, was believed to have died sometime in the mid-2000s. The father, the original author, died before any modern records could reach him. He was buried, they found, beneath the floor of the compound. 3 generations, 1 isolated stretch of wilderness. 50 years the grandson was never found. A search covering the full 12-mile radius turned up trails and caches, and what appeared to be long-term observation points. Elevated platforms built into the upper branches of old-growth trees, invisible from the ground. But no person, no trace of a living man, except for the signs of someone who knew exactly how to leave none. I requested a transfer back to Asheville. I told them family reasons, just like Earl Bowen told me to. But before I left, I drove out to the trailhead nearest to where I had found the original post. I told myself I just needed to see it one more time. To close something in my head. I don't know if that's the real reason. I pushed through the mountain laurel and I stood in front of the old USFS post. I looked at the south-facing side. There were 42 marks now. The 42nd was fresh. The wood was still pale at the cut edges, not yet darkened by weather. It had been carved recently. In the past few weeks, I took a photo. I sent it to the FBI case agent without a message, no explanation needed. Then I stood there in the gray autumn quiet and I looked at the tree line around me. Long sight lines between bare trees in every direction. The kind of visibility that should make you feel safe. I looked for a long time. I didn't see anything. But you have to understand, that was never the part that scared me. What scared me was the knowing. Knowing that he had been out there long enough to learn what I learned too late. That the forest doesn't give you away. It keeps you. It folds you in and holds you still and lets the world look right past you. He knew that better than anyone alive. Maybe better than anyone who would stay alive. I got in my truck. I drove away. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I was afraid of what I would see in the tree line behind me. I was more afraid of what I wouldn't. The tally marks post was removed by USFS maintenance crews 6 weeks after the investigation closed. The replacement post was installed the following spring. It has 42 marks on it. No one knows who put them there.